Good morning, Tim and Devo. Well, as Prime Minister Mark Carney prepares to huddle with Canada's premiers in cottage country today to talk about possible nation-building projects, Indigenous leaders will have to watch from the sidelines. National Indigenous organizations met with the premiers yesterday amid deepening concerns about legislation to fast-track infrastructure projects, but they will not have a seat at the table today. Joining us live from Huntsville now, Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak. Really appreciate you taking the time this morning, Chief, for the conversation. Good morning.
Well, good morning.
How are you feeling your meeting with the premiers went yesterday?
Well, I think that it was positive. They did all agree to a First Minister's meeting with First Nations people. And I think that that's a good thing. And, First Nations, of course, we stand with all Canadians against Trump's tariffs. First Nations also support economic development, but not at the expense of our rights or of the environment. We have to have a balance and think of all of our grandchildren for many generations ahead. And I think that if we are thinking national infrastructure projects, then we should be thinking about closing the First Nations infrastructure gap. And as many of your listeners may or may not know, the infrastructure gap is a huge gap for children on reserve versus children off reserve when it comes to things like schools and housing and roads and, basic things like high-speed internet, things that all of us can take for granted. Many people in First Nations communities don't have those luxuries that people in towns and cities across this country have. And so closing and narrowing that huge infrastructure gap is also a talking point I think that we have to have in this country. And I know that people want to go immediately to big major projects, but when the basic infrastructure for First Nations children is not there, what do we do? And that means that we have to do things differently in this country. So I do welcome yesterday's meeting and the commitment from the premiers to also push alongside myself for a First Minister's meeting to deal with some of these issues in this country.
I want to ask you specifically about comments Premier Doug Ford made yesterday, because he appeared to take a bit of a softer stance when it comes to Ontario's Bill 5. He said that the province will not move ahead with projects unless affected First Nations are on board, but that's not explicitly what the legislation says. So do you believe Doug Ford when he says that?
Look, I'm going to wait to give you a response on that till September 3, 4, and 5. All of our chiefs across Canada will be meeting in Winnipeg. You're all invited. And our leadership will gather then. And I'm sure that they'll have a roadmap on this bill and bills like it. And I think that, I want to reserve those discussions until after our chiefs have had a chance to thoroughly talk amongst themselves within Assembly, and we'll find that path forward.
What message do you hope the premiers take into their meeting with the Prime Minister today, fresh off their meeting yesterday with Indigenous leaders like yourself?
Well, look, I know it's hard for them to hear it, but I did also remind them that First Nations need a full seat at the table. Although we appreciate speaking to them yesterday and spending the day with all of them yesterday, getting towards consensus on having a First Minister's meeting with the premiers and myself. But at the same time, we need a proper seat at the table when this country's talking. And I think that if we continue to do things in the same way the past 150 years, look where it has brought First Nations people. And First Nations people are the only people around the world that are legislated that have to face some of these things that are left out of the banking system. For instance, if someone on reserve wanted to build a McDonald's, for instance, and all the hurdles that they would have to go through compared to if there was somebody off reserve. All these things are hard to talk about, but they're the truth. And our First Nations people are always pushed back out of the economy. And, let's have those conversations in this country.
Did you get any clarity from the premiers yesterday about when a First Minister's meeting might happen with Indigenous leaders at the table, or was it just that they'll bring it up with the Prime Minister?
Well, they need to advise the Prime Minister that that's our intention. We're a consensus on that. So I hope that the Prime Minister's now, it'll be in his hands to call that and to focus on that. And it hasn't happened since I think the 1980s. So it's a big thing for First Nations people, and we have a lot to talk about, and it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, very much long overdue. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse, Nepinak. I have to leave it there. I'm out of time. Thanks so much for making time again this morning.
Thank you.